My name is Ashley Nieves. I'm running for Board of Education. I am here with April Montgomery, who is also running for Board of Education on my side, my lovely woman. And then I have April Miller, who is a candidate for Delegate District 4. So we thought we'd come together in a different way than us constantly posting press releases, because we found a very important piece to everything that we have been posting since about April. So I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a rundown of what we found, and then we're going to go from there. So on May 22nd, 2019, we found a Memorandum of Understanding, which is a contract with FCPS that Terry Albin is on with Advocates for Youth. And a little bit of the information that we have is that this contract came in play in March of 1st, 2019. Now remember, this was passed in May of 2019 on the Board of Education meeting to July 31st, 2021. So a little bit of Advocates for Youth is on here that they have with their partner, which would be the Advocates for Youth project partner of Nora Gelpern. She would be playing a role with FCPS. Now, April, you're going to give me a little bit of a rundown of what you found regarding Advocates for Youth.
Well, my research into Advocates for Youth definitely started back in 2021. My daughter had taken a class, a health class, and it was highly inappropriate. And this was before any of this framework had been implemented, even before I had chosen to run for Board of Education. I started looking into alternate routes or alternate, this had kind of tied into looking for educational curriculums on the web that directly connected to what I was hearing in her classroom about, we had topics like anal sex and vaginal sex and all these things that are just not appropriate for 12-year-olds. In my mind. And I came across Advocates for Youth, and I started looking into kind of what that company or organization is. And one of the things that they truly do concentrate on is youth bodily autonomy and their rights to their own bodies, basically. And they actually cater to all ages, starting in pre-kindergarten. They have videos pertaining to many things through a sub-part called amaze.org. They also partner with Planned Parenthood. When I started looking deeper into this organization and their website, I was able to find that they have a curriculum written with framework and lessons and goals for children by the end of certain grades. And as I'm reading through this, I was shocked because what I saw in the 7th grade was very similar to what my daughter was being taught. So I started keeping an eye on Advocates for Youth because I was concerned, like maybe there's a connection here. I'm not sure exactly what it might be, but a lot of the stuff on here is just not age appropriate, and it's nowhere apparently in the curriculum for FCPS. The other thing that we've kind of connected to Advocates for Youth is a company called the Grove Foundation. The Grove Foundation is funding the partnership in part between Advocates for Youth and Planned Parenthood. And the Grove Foundation is very, very political, and that kind of red flags a lot of other things for me. I know that there's been, April Miller here she sat on the board for 8 years, and her term ended in December of 2018. Prior to her leaving the board, they had discussed a lot of future curriculum choices that would implement some of these things, and I know you were concerned about when they added these things in.
Yeah, so my recollection, and if you go back to the August 23rd, 2017 board meeting, the standards were presented that were what we call skills-based standards. And 2017 is before this new Maryland Health Framework or anything. And so what you may notice when you look at if you go back on board docs and you can look at it, what standards were proposed, you can either go to the August 23rd meeting, or you can go to the April 11th meeting from 2018 when they eventually passed. And this is where it is so important to have board members that respect parents and parental involvement and local control. Because while this seems like it's under local control, the pieces that we're finding is that it's a nationalized agenda. Mm-hmm. And these are coming from places other than our local curriculum writers. And this is what has us concerned about how it's been passed, the way it's been done. So back in 2017, I was very concerned about some of the ones that were presented. This was only for the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It was only for the middle school. And a lot of it was as far as the gender identity and teaching the sexually transmitted diseases, the way they are transmitted, to 7th graders that may or may not be ready for this information. And so I wanted it to go to other committees. So I wanted it to go to our psychological services, our school health council, which has pediatricians on it, and our family life advisory committee. And I wanted their opinions on it, as well as taking it back to our curriculum committee to find out exactly how these standards were going to be placed into curriculum. And then that was all done, and it was re-brought up on April 11th of 2018. And I still was not comfortable. You can go back and watch the questions that I asked, how I felt about it. But the board, it was motioned for approval by Elizabeth Barrett and seconded by Mike Beninsky, and the motion carried with all the board members except for myself voting for it. So it was a 6-1 vote, I believe. That put into motion evidently things that I had been concerned about, and it put those things into motion. And that's where we're finding this MOU started. They voted on it in May, but the actual MOU date is March 3rd, right, Ashley?
March 1st.
March 1st of 2019. 2019, I left the board. Colleen Cusimano, another person who usually would have some checks and balance for some of these things going into classrooms. We left the board, and it was a completely...
It was a 180.
It was a complete 180 in parental involvement, in any kind of, a voice for our parents and bringing these issues forward, literally from the 2018, April of 2018 is when it was voted into, like I said, this next year in March. And we're going to put the MOU, we're going to link it to that. And I want Ashley to go over a few of the things that are in this MOU, because this is where some of the concerning things showed up in our classrooms that then April Montgomery saw and heard about in her child's classroom.
So looking at this MOU, it's a contract between Frederick County Public Schools and Advocates for Youth, which April Montgomery touched a little bit on about where they stand. So it's a working to institutionalize sexuality education project, WISE project. I think you all should definitely do your research on that information. So it's a contract with the project partner will be Nora Gelburn, who is the Director of Sexuality Education Training, Brian Griffith, who is the Curriculum Specialist for Secondary Health and Physical Education, and Jamie Hitchner, the Curriculum Specialist, Elementary Health and Physical Education. So they will be the contacts for the school district. Okay, so now the project partner roles and responsibilities. I'm just going to touch on a couple of these, and maybe April can expand on them. So number 3, provide at least 2 in-person trainings per year for targeted participants. So that would be an example of a secondary and elementary health or a PE teacher, school nurses, classroom teachers, and or school counselors, and other professional development as appropriate. They will make recommendations for improvements related to lesson plans, inclusive practices, best practices when teaching controversial topics, strategies to include parents or caregivers in the provision of family life and sexuality education, and provide examples to the school district as appropriate. So that's only a couple of things, and you can definitely read what you think is appropriate, but a little bit of my concern when I saw this was they were in the classrooms with your children and basically using your children to develop this sexual education. And I mean, what does that mean, April? I mean, you've looked into even more things.
Yeah, so one of the things that they did bring into the classroom, and I think, this is one of the reasons why the board probably agreed with it, is the funding piece. So everything usually comes down to funding and following the money.
Follow that money.
Follow the money. So if you go down to the end of the MOU, it says the funding. All of the funding required to cover the goods and services outlined in this agreement will come from Advocates for Youth through their grant funding from the Grove Foundation.
Yep.
The staff time for Nora Gelprin, Director of Sexuality Education and Training, and the products and services she can provide FCPS at no cost is the equivalent of approximately $20,000 annually. Now, we have heard the name Nora Gelprin before, actually in a few places.
Yeah.
We have heard her name actually on the Maryland State Framework. So the health framework that started this whole thing that FCPS passed on consent agenda on March 23rd has Nora Gelprin's name as a contributor. So this is what Ashley was saying about developing these standards. They were writing those standards while this contract was in place at FCPS.
So why would they need a contract? Because they wanted to
be
in the school.
Be in the schools.
Then they can create this.
Yeah, they want their foot in the doors of the schools. And part of what that $20,000 went to cover was this, which we'll put up there too, which is a contraceptive kit, and the kit contents.
So the kit is used for teaching. And
I'm assuming in the classrooms, yes.
And this was for middle school?
This was for middle school, yes. Yeah. So, and that's where they had the condom demonstrator for 7th graders, which they conveniently called a Woody, which is kind of interesting. They had cycle beads, a dental dam in this kit. They had different kinds of condoms with directions, lubricants, spermicidal film, birth control, a ring demonstrator, a speculum, the birth control patch, and a box of expired emergency contraceptives. So our Plan B pills, and an IUD, and a Nexplanon demonstrator. So they also had a thing about STD facts and what is emergency birth control. So this is what they were teaching our 7th graders on top of what we found out about how they're teaching about the STIs, and they're teaching about the different gender identities, orientations, things like that. So that is what they are teaching to 7th graders.
But in this contract, it wasn't just for middle schoolers. They were looking at it from K through 12.
Right.
Yes, this contract does say K through 12. This kit is what I'm hoping. It was probably used in high school as well. Yes, you are probably correct. Because I think at first it was geared to 8th and 9th grade, but then they bumped everything down to 7th grade. Yes.
Yep, they bumped it down to 7th grade. I will tell you that the quote-unquote Woody demonstration with the wooden phallic symbol, that was not taught until 9th grade.
Okay.
But this is all before the framework. So this was before the framework was in effect. This is before that official curriculum from Advocates for Youth becomes part of our curriculum. It is, we will see how this keeps moving down and down and down into younger and younger ages. And I think that is really the main concern for me as a mother and a lot of parents around there. It's not necessarily the education that these children do need on STDs and STIs and keeping themselves safe, and abstinence and puberty, because these are things that are going to happen to them. Mm-hmm. And even at the right time, understanding how society has changed and how we do need to love and respect everyone. But at kindergarten through 3rd grade level, most parents believe it is inappropriate. And the way that they're going about it by teaching these children about bodily autonomy goes into a lot of social issues that we're seeing throughout the country, where kids are standing up against their parents and deciding to do things to their bodies that could be harmful. Mm-hmm. And at a young age, they may not even fully comprehend what it is that they're doing. There are, Amaze videos about puberty blockers and how to obtain them. The video that was just approved by FLAC here in Frederick County talks about STDs and how to get tested. And don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. Most of the time it can just be fixed with a pill. and it draws your children towards Planned Parenthood. Now, am I going to tell you that Planned Parenthood hasn't been there for some things for women's health that are wonderful? No, but it has a bad reputation with a lot of people. And I think that whatever resources our schools are using, the parents need to be involved in the decision making when it comes to that, because you do have to worry about all students and all parents and all staff. These staff members have to teach whatever comes down the pike. They don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry for our staff members because they're having stuff come across their desks that a lot of them don't want to teach.
Or don't feel comfortable teaching.
Right.
I mean,
or haven't been trained, or feel, and even if they are trained, that may make them even more uncomfortable with the training, because a lot of this training is like I said, the project partner, which is Advocates for Youth, basically, is to have participate with school district stakeholders in reviewing the current textbooks, outside guest speakers.
Right.
Do we want someone like Advocates for Youth bringing in guest speakers for our children? Do we want Planned Parenthood bringing in guest speakers for our children? And other, current curricular programs about human growth, development, and sexuality education, K through 12. K through 12. Sexuality, K through 12. So they also will purchase teaching aids, which is what we were talking about, and supplemental materials. And then provide the staff their final sustainability plan to address policy, practice, and staff development and other essential aspects of institutionalizing sex education. And that's the biggest thing right there. This is why you are seeing this in New Jersey. Yeah. And you are seeing this all across the country right now, in Florida, everywhere else, because they are trying to nationalize and institutionalize sex ed. And it is a movement, and it has been going on for several years. And because it's finally hitting the classrooms, and frankly, probably because a big part of COVID, when kids were home and parents started hearing this, and now you have a lot of plans that are being put in place that, like April was saying, where children are causing mental harm, they are causing physical changes that cannot be undone in 12 and 13-year-olds. And the parents aren't even told. And this is the riskiest group, as everyone tells us, for suicide, self-harm behaviors, and they're not even telling the parents.
Right. That piece really is very difficult for me as well. You think about all of these different companies that are getting involved and organizations that are getting involved and being brought in, and you start looking into them, like the Grow Foundation and Advocates for Youth and Planned Parenthood. And they've been organizations like Advocates for Youth and Planned Parenthood have been on this journey for a very long time. They've just now, over the last few years, started to implement their own curriculum and their own, for lack of a better term, agenda into the local schools around the country. And there are many, many governors saying no. There are many school boards standing up for their constituents and the children and the teachers that do not want this in the schools. And it's not because they don't care about the lives of the transgender children or their parents, or keeping them safe, because there are situations where transgender youth do not have supportive parents, and they do need allies, but there's better ways to do it than starting this information with our 5-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right. So Advocates for Youth, they have drifted off into a maze, right? So they have these videos, and the Board of Education of Frederick County has approved some of these videos. And now the FLAC meetings, which is Family Life Advisory Committee, they are now allowed to approve everything that comes to them, right? What does that include?
Yeah, so right now, honestly, it's a little confusing, because when we put out that one press release basically explaining that the Board of Education in April of 2021 actually voted, I think it was 6-1. Mr. Jason Johnson was opposed
Mr. J.
Yeah, Mr. J.
Mr. J.
Yeah, everybody knows Mr. J, right? I'm fond of Mr. J. There, I think that he really does stand up for, parent being transparent with the parents.
Yes.
Well, they voted because FLAC came to them. This was something that FLAC presented to the board to, allow them to have power to approve resources. Now, in that meeting, when they were approved, when the board gave approval, FLAC was asking for the ability to approve resources, including videos, multimedia, and books. Okay, books meaning what? I mean, that's a pretty broad section there. I will tell you that in you're distracting me.
Sorry.
I will tell you that in a curriculum and instruction meeting, there was a frequently asked questions uploaded to the board docs that definitely went over the fact and used the word lessons as well. And then interim superintendent Dr. Marco, he alluded to that fact as well during his April superintendent chat online. So 2 different times I heard the word lessons. That is not a resource. That is not a video, multimedia, or a book. A lesson is something that's created during curriculum. So go further into that.
Which lessons would go through the curriculum so then it would go to the board to approve?
Not necessarily. Usually the board approves the standards, and then they'll have curriculum writing over the summer. And usually then the next place you would see that would be in the classroom. So the board approves the standard. It's usually you wouldn't see the whole curriculum come back to you.
Well, I think that the most interesting part is that when you're talking about lessons, that's where it gets tricky, because you have to think about the FLAC committee, the Family Life Advisory Committee. They are citizens, and they include one board member at the present time. It's David Bass, and the student member of the board, and both of them vote. So there is an 18-year-old voting on lessons and materials that our children are going to be presented with without being overseen by the Board of Education. I take an issue with that.
Right. So there's not more than that one step.
No.
Reviewing this information and taking it to, how you said you went and said, I want really good people who understand children's minds.
Right.
And what is appropriate for a child to learn.
Yes.
You went through that with the middle school curriculum that they were putting through.
Yes. Yeah, because it was very important to me that when we're talking about these sensitive topics, especially at that time, like I said, it was only middle school, but you're talking about 6th and 7th graders. And I know what my kids were like in 6th and 7th grade. And every child is different, right? And we have children with special needs in our schools. And so every child's development is different. And so when you're talking about these difficult conversations, you really need to, first of all, you have no idea what a kid's bringing into them into school in the backpack, right? You don't know what that kid's been through, first of all. And so you don't know what you're going to be triggering in them. You don't know what you're going to be teaching them that may bring up flashbacks, memories, things like that, right? PTSD, if they were abused or if there was abuse. So you, first of all, as a teacher, you don't necessarily know that. And so that was a big concern as well. And also, like I said, the developmental appropriateness of it, just like we were talking about gender identity and those discussions that were planned to happen as down in our kindergarten, first grade, and the types of discussions they were planning on doing, really concerned me. And so that's why I wanted, especially the pediatricians to weigh in on it, and I wanted the psychologists to weigh in from a developmental. And I really wanted to be thoughtful and purposeful, and plus give parents plenty of time to see what information was going to be put in the schools and in the classrooms.
Right. So right now, this MOU is a contract with FCPS and Advocates for Youth that Terry Alvin ultimately signed after it was approved by the board. Now, they're in your classrooms. Explain to me, you found even more information because Nora Gelpern was a project partner. So she did all of the roles and responsibilities in FCPS. At the same time, she was creating the framework at MSDE with Brian Griffith and Jamie Hitchner.
Yeah, so one of the things you always look for is, when you pull a document, you want to find out what the sources were, and you want to find out who wrote it and who was involved. And so when we looked at the Maryland Health Framework that was passed March of 23 or March 23rd of this year by the board, it was written from 2020 because it was approved 2019 to be written. It was sent from the State Board of Ed to MSDE, Maryland State Department of Education's Curriculum and Instruction department, and then they wrote the framework, but they had help, and Brian Griffith was on there as a part of the committee. So he was an active role probably at every single meeting while they were writing this framework. And again, these are some of the things that were already being taught in FCPS before the framework was even written. So, again, you start to think of where did this stuff come from? Where did they, and those are some of the questions I asked back in 2017 and 2018. Where is all this coming from? Why do we need these changes? What's going on with it? And I never got a satisfactory answer from me, right? Because usually it's driven by the state. Usually the state is driving this. The state of Maryland sees a problem. They changed COMAR, which they did with this, and that caused a big part of that FLAC committee change was driven by COMAR. Which is the Code of Maryland regulations, which the school systems have to follow. So when they made those changes to COMAR and then they started writing this curriculum, that's what got then was being written. So Brian Griffith was a huge part of it. He was already doing this in middle schools.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Brian was the one that definitely spoke up during a committee meeting with the curriculum and instruction, stating that there were no major changes.
Correct.
Yes.
Right.
Correct. When, no major changes, but maybe at the 6th, 7th, and 8th, again, because we'd already been doing it, which, where did that come from? But then also, this was huge changes for
elementary,
certainly, and for high school. They added a course. That's the other thing we haven't talked about, which we'll do on another recording. That's a whole other thing. They added a whole other high school class that's a graduation requirement. That part just completely dumbfounds me, why essentially you need basically a whole year of health education. But
what do you need that when you go through all of this?
You're going through all of this, right?
You're literally having health
all of it.
every single time you're in the classroom. It's
right.
just continuous.
So then the other contributors on this were Jamie Hitchner, who he should have brought this to the board, what changes were taking place. And then as well, our friend Nora Gelfand was on there as a contributor. So that's why we're saying at the same time she's writing the standards, she's practicing on her kids.
But was she really writing it because we found it on the Advocates for Youth website?
Yeah, we found a lot of it, and we found a lot of basically what happened is when they're looking at the standards, which again they're helping create, they do a lot of crosswalking what they're doing with their curriculum on their site, as well as then they're also doing lesson plans, and that's where the 3 R's come in, and so they're doing a lot of that.
The 3 R's was already written. That was prior to it. So what they're doing is they're cross-referencing the laws in the state. They're bringing Advocates for Youth framework and curriculum to, and they're picking and choosing what of the 3 R's are allowed. Now, right now, Maryland doesn't have many rules, so most of the stuff that are on the 3 R's, you are seeing verbatim in the framework from Maryland's MSDE, and then our adopted framework as well, which we set them side by side. They were identical.
But the thing is, you have to worry too, and this is a whole nother conversation, is that Advocates for Youth is trying to go to Congress and get things done in Congress where the states don't even have control over this.
Right, it will be nationwide.
That's what they want.
This is what we're scared of.
That's what they want. They have national health standards, that they are national sex education standards, which is linked right from the MSDE website. And that was one of the things, this is one of the pieces that was used to build the Maryland framework, is national sex education standards. And it's written by Advocates for Youth, Answer Sex Ed Honestly, and Sex Ed for Social Change, which is either SECUS or SICUS, however you would like to pronounce it. That is, completely, a lot of it is taken from them. So, and like I said, it's hooked right onto the Maryland State Department of Ed website for this. So, it's a bigger plan.
So this was already kind of thought of by Advocates for Youth. they basically overtook FCPS by getting into the actual classrooms and seeing what was actually being taught at that time. So then they can go back and develop their framework and see what they want to put in there based on what's being taught, what's not being taught, what they think is appropriate.
What textbooks are already being used, what recommendations. And what really bothered me, and this will tie into the latest Family Life Advisory Committee meeting. So at the latest Family Life Advisory Committee meeting, it was, we all have to take a deep breath because it was very, very frustrating. And it was very frustrating for us because we are literally, our only motive in this is to bring the truth to parents. That is literally our only motive in this. And when we find documents, when we find things that are put on consent agenda that are passed without a lot of public input or public dialogue that are so concerning for families, it upsets us. Mm-hmm. But we are trying to do this in a way that we are giving you the truth and we are giving you transparency and we are giving it to you in a way that a rational person looking at these documents, looking at these would read. And it's actually, part of it's being successful because they are listening to what we're saying.
Sure.
They're not being truthful about what we're saying because every time we say something, there tends to be an excuse.
Yep.
There tends to be a reason. So, the biggest thing
was...
backpedaling. And backpedaling about it. The biggest thing when we did our first press release was about the opt-out. They were upset about the opt-out. Well, it says right in the framework that the opt-out for family life and sexuality would not begin until 4th or 5th grade. And gender identity is in that category in kindergarten. So therefore, FCPS would actually have to, if they wanted them to opt out of that topic, one, they would have to make the topic either a self-lesson or a self-unit, and then give parent the opt-out of that unit. They would have to let parents opt out of any book related to it. They would have to, and tell them when that book was being related. But when it really got tricky was at the middle school when we brought up that when they talk about the oral, anal, vaginal in relation to the sexually transmitted disease video, that is right under something called the disease prevention unit.
Yep.
And because it's under the disease prevention unit, on 6/25, when the superintendent presented these changes to the State Board of Ed, she specifically said that they would not be eligible for the opt-out because they were so important. So a rational person would say, if it's being taught in that unit, of which I would think the video would qualify under that unit.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's definitely about STIs, and even though the video states STD, it should be STIs. That's what they're called now.
Right. Yes, that is very true.
And they mentioned that at the FLAC meeting. I will tell you that some of the things that were said at that FLAC meeting, wonderful. But 90% of it was very sneaky. It was the video that they passed was voted on before public comment. They voted by paper and not by hand, so we had no idea who voted for what. And they went through a packet, and it's interesting because after it was requested by myself, April Miller, Heather Fletcher, a couple of other people that were like, whoa, I want to see that document. Mm-hmm. I mean, Heather Fletcher had asked for it at the meeting, and they wouldn't let her see it, and they told her they would email it to her.
Mm-hmm. Which is not right, coming from a public meeting. If you have documents that you present in an open meeting, and this is an open meeting, and it's an important open meeting, because remember, we said they took the parents out of the process in sending it to the Board of Ed. So the Board of Ed specifically took transparency and parents out of the process when they made that decision back in April of 21 to allow items that come to FLAC to go right to staff. So basically, the vote of the FLAC committee directs staff, just like the vote of the board would direct staff. So this is huge, and these meetings are not being recorded. Parents can't see the discussion. And as a regular general parent, who has time to go and look at for all these meetings, go to these meetings, find the documentation, find out what that means, find out what this video means? They don't have time.
Not only that, but I mean, you can attest to this. Like, there was how many documents that they posted. It was given to them in one packet. It was one neat little packet. And when they posted these things late in the day they said they would post it finally, it was a bunch of different links, and half of them were for Advocates for Youth.
Right. But that's the thing, like, that's where people are getting very frustrated, is that they can't always make the Board of Education meetings.
Right.
And we almost overlooked the health curriculum framework being passed because they put it in the consent agenda.
Yep.
The only way we found that was because we clicked on it and we looked through all of these documents, and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. I'm like, what is this? But an average person, like, I haven't stopped. And we literally have not stopped for over a month.
Oh, yeah.
And we keep finding more and more and more, and that's why we want to keep bringing it to the public, because we don't want to be like the board. We want a new board that literally shows all of this that's going on. We don't want to wait 6 days before the Board of Education meeting for you to review anything. Because they're approving books, they're approving curriculum, they're approving all sorts of stuff, and do you really have time to go through all of the books? Do you have time to go through all of the curriculum changes? I mean, not an average person, because I don't even have that time. And I'm not a parent. I mean, I can't even imagine having 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, and a job, and, you're taking care of your entire family, and I'm already struggling.
It's
to
a
be
lot.
honest, because this is only for one curriculum. I'm going to be truthful with people. This is a lot of information, and it hasn't stopped. I mean, I'm literally living, breathing, and eating this curriculum, and Advocates for Youth, and all of this. I mean, you guys can contest to that.
Oh, yeah.
You are doing the same thing and has not stopped.
That's part of the reason this is audio, right? Because we are lack of sleep here, trying to bring you everything that we can.
Bring you video, but nobody needs to see that right now.
But that's the thing, like, I mean, April Montgomery and I have been doing a lot of this, and April Miller has been such great help, because anything that we find, we bring it to each other to kind of bounce off, like, what does this really mean? Tiffany Noble, we need, and Heather Fletcher, I mean, we're literally running with these women because we haven't stopped, and we want all of these things to be brought to the public so they can show up. And they can't even show up to a curriculum meeting, because why do they need them at 9 o'clock in the morning? 10 o'clock in the morning?
I know. So that is hard. I mean, as a board member, that is hard. You are there for a lot of meetings, but what you're doing now shows what kind of board members you'll be.
But no, I'm saying for the public, for a parent to show up.
For a parent to have
and you're
that.
not even recorded. Because if you can't show up, at least like for Board of Education meetings, if you can't make it, I completely understand. It's 6 o'clock at night. They could go for hours.
Oh, then they do.
Yes, they do. Trust me.
The curriculum committee meetings, the policy committee meetings, the flag meetings.
They all need to be recorded.
They're not recorded for families
the
to go back and look
instruction
at.
meeting they are on YouTube.
The curriculum, yes.
The
yes,
curriculum
they do
meetings,
have, which took months, which took them weeks to put up some
the latest
videos.
one. Yeah, and we will bring you some special quotes from that one.
That was a good one.
March of 2021. It was a great
That
one.
was a good one.
So I do want to bring this back to that disease prevention and control, because that really bothered me when I heard that they were trying to say that in our last press release that we were not being truthful about the opt-out. And first of all, we said about the disease prevention and control category that is in the health framework, which is different than that family life and sexuality. And so I just wanted to read to you a couple things that are on there, which is identify how the most common sexually transmitted infections are transmitted. How they're transmitted. Describe ways to decrease the spread of STIs, including HIV, through abstinence, using condoms consistently and correctly when having sex, reducing one's number of sexual partners, and using and practicing universal precautions. Describing typical signs, symptoms, consequences, and treatment of common STIs, including HIV. So those are some of the things that are in the disease prevention and control. They are not under the family life and sexuality category. So, and again, I'm going to read you exactly from page 2 of the Maryland State Department of Education meeting where Dr. Karen Salmon gave the presentation in the background about this, and what she said about we had talked about the contraceptives being now we'll begin in 7th grade versus 8th grade.
Yep.
So I guess that wasn't a big enough thing for, Mr. Griffin didn't really care about that part of it.
Right.
And with the goal of addressing the rise of sexually transmitted infections in Maryland youth. And then they also talked about disease prevention. Number 6, disease prevention. The parent/student opt-out is removed as a safety issue. This instruction includes medically accurate information about contact with bodily fluids as a method of transmitting infections.
Yeah, the transfer of bodily fluids can actually encompass many areas of sexual interactions and ways to spread disease.
Yes.
And the framework bullet points that you just read were highly connected to sexual activity.
Yes.
So there will be parts of this that are not going to be part of family life, and they won't be able to opt out. Now, if the board would like to, if FLAC and the Board of Education are going to move things around in this framework and not follow it the way that COMAR states and the MSDE states, well, then why couldn't they do that with other things? Why
the gender identity in kindergarten? Which is, if they are going to do that, great. But
that'd be great.
That's what we're pushing for.
That would be great.
That's why we're bringing this forward. It's not, we said in our press release, if it's under this category, there's no opt-out. We were quoting Dr. Salmon. We weren't making this up in April in Ashley land.
Yeah, no.
We weren't. We were quoting Dr. Salmon. So if Dr. Cuppet would like to go against what Dr. Salmon said, I am completely all for that because it's not right. And parents do need to know when kids are being taught that information. And they do need to have the option of opting out.
But I think a lot of parents that I've talked to, and you may have talked to, they're very concerned because right now all we have is a framework.
Right.
They have not created a curriculum for this. And I understand that there are steps for that. But a lot of the questions that parents have with their elementary schoolers is that, how is this going to be taught? Is it going to be a separate class? Is this going to be intertwined with other subjects? I mean, we don't even know what to expect.
I can tell you as somebody who worked in an elementary school, it'll be very difficult to really have a designated time unless they're bringing someone in that's going to teach this to the students, unless it's like a scheduled event. But if there are teachable moments, which is a lot of elementary school, especially at the very young ages, it's teachable moments. It's going to be really difficult for teachers to keep track of their opt-out list on their desk and say, oh, one moment, please. So-and-so, 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 go this way. Especially,
where are they going to go?
I don't know.
They don't have the staffing.
They don't have the staffing, and that is the other thing.
Take them there.
So my other thing is, too, that I get a little concerned about is not only how are they going to teach this, but teachers are tired.
Teachers are so tired.
Teachers are extremely tired. They're overworked. They're underpaid, and they don't have the time. So they want to have these teachers do another training.
Mm-hmm.
They want them to incorporate this into their classrooms for, God knows how many students they have in one classroom to teach this material. And, I'm sorry, but you cannot control children to go off of these directions of what you're discussing. Yeah, you might just bring up, here's a definition, this is what this means. Little kids are just going to start going off and be like, oh, well, what is this? Oh, what is that? And it's going to change into different interactions and different topics being talked about.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we said, particularly at that elementary school level, and people really need to look at what they're teaching in 4th and 5th grade as well. As far as the framework. So, and again, the framework was passed in COMAR. So the framework itself was listed as what the skills and standards that should be taught. And again, if FCPS is going to delineate that and say we're not going to do that, then they need to let parents know that. So, and like you were saying, as far as what it looks like, and the only time that that's going to happen, unless the board says differently, is those weeks right before this is taught.
Right.
That's when they can see lesson plans, and a lot of times it's not convenient. So hopefully, as we go through, they will make those things more convenient and make those policies that need to drive parental involvement.
So another thing is like, okay, they just passed multiple math books and multiple language arts books, right?
Yes.
So when you look at this material, are they going to do it that it's going to be a set standard for every single kid to go through the same thing for every single teacher? We don't even know what that looks like. Are they going to give them, here's a bunch of videos that you can use, here's a bunch of materials that you can use book-wise, any of that? Are they going to just have a menu and each teacher can just go off of that menu? And so that's not going to be brought to the parents.
So right? Usually when they do these books, they apparently go through a process, although I'm not exactly sure what that process is, because apparently the curriculum instruction committee has nothing to do with books anymore, or if they ever did.
No, they usually just put them out in libraries. And like back then I used to make them put them out into all the libraries. And then I also used to actually have a set for the board because they didn't even have the set for the board. And I was just like, well, if I'm supposed to be approving these, I'd actually really like a convenient place to go. And just like I'm sure most parents would.
I'd like to be able to give Sue Johnson some credit because she said that she would rent out part of her own property to hold those books if she needs to, but she would like to have copies of those books all the time.
Yes.
She wanted to read all of them, and she's the only one who voted against passing these textbooks, which again were on their action consent agenda. So they just were going to pass it without talking about it.
And I'm going to go flashback. Turk math, the bane of everyone's existence in 2010, was passed on. Consent agenda.
Yeah, the consent agenda.
But that's the thing, like, consent agenda is just...
Of which Karen Yellow was a huge favor of. She's a huge Turk math proponent.
But that's what I mean, like, consent agenda is what a lot of people need to pay attention to, and that's where we're getting a lot of our information from.
Yes.
Is the consent agenda, because they just pass it through. They say that they've had prior discussions and all this stuff, but they're just passing it and nobody is bringing it up to their attention. They have the control to take that off of the consent agenda.
Yeah.
Yes, as they demonstrated at the last meeting, finally.
Yep. Sue Johnson took it off for communication, and what was infuriating to me is that both she and Mr. J spoke very clearly about two specific books, one of which had sexual assault depicted in it, and this was for fourth grade level. And
language arts.
It's for language arts. This was for language arts, right?
Yeah. Let's go back to that. Language arts, and again,
in elementary school.
And again, now, first of all, they have a policy that I helped put in place because I didn't understand why, if movies had certain kind of content on them, you had to have a permission slips, but books didn't. And I go back to the thing that you don't know what that kid is bringing in their backpack. You don't know which of them has been sexually assaulted. So when you're starting talking about that in fourth grade and you don't know that kid, what potential damage are you doing?
Well, yeah. And honestly, Mr. J brought that up. He said this could lead to PTSD moments. We need to make sure this is led reading and not just independent reading. I emailed him and I asked him, okay, so I'm confused because you definitely brought up some very valid points, but then voted to approve these books. How are you going to make sure that it is put into some sort of explanation or implemented that Prairie Lotus book is not going to be read independently? You voted it in the way it is.
Right. Is it just going to be like a lot of times I think elementary school teachers just have these books. They don't have in middle school, as far as from what I remember, it's usually not everyone reading the same books for different projects. From what I remember from the kids being in elementary school, it was each person did a different book or picked a different person or picked something and then read it and either wrote their report or whatever.
It's a literal menu. I actually was given access, and I will never reveal who gives me things because it comes from a few different teachers, a list of probably 3,000 books that are approved, that they're approved materials, they're approved books that probably went through consent agenda, that these teachers can say, well, we're learning about Asian Americans this week. I'm going to go and pick something about Asian American culture, and she or he can go through the library and pick out a book that they would like to use. So if it's the same way, this Prairie Lotus book is going to be there as well. And it's going to be a coming of age story. I don't know when they're going to do it, but it's fourth grade. They don't need to be hearing about it.
Classroom. The ones that were approved are going to be classroom use books because library is a whole different animal.
Right.
Library approval is a whole different thing.
But back to what I was saying, it's like parents are concerned about what is actually going to be taught in this curriculum when it shows up into the classroom, and we don't know when that will be. Maybe the fall or maybe the spring, but how is it going to be given to parents to review? Usually it's in there. It's
you got to look for it.
Well, yeah, it's usually the week or two before, and so they have been doing more with digital codes, where they'll give you a digital code where you can look, or you can make an appointment or to go to central office to look at it, or you can go into the schools. But one, you got to make sure they give all the materials because you don't know which videos and things like that they'll be pulling from. And what I thought was very interesting too, as far as like the Advocates for Youth and the FLAC committee meeting, this last one is, one, the way that Brian Griffith described that was that these documents that they were reviewing in this packet was that these are medically trusted sources.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Right. That these were medically trusted sources. I don't consider Advocates for Youth, especially if you go for yourself, look for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I don't consider someone who has an agenda to nationalize sex ed as a medically objective source.
Right.
The other, not compared to the other one was like the American Academy of Pediatrics, I think was one of the other sources. And then a Canadian one, which I'm really not understanding that because there are so many more. I mean, these are U.S. schools. Why are we bringing Canadian parental fact sheets into our schools?
They were interesting.
They're very interesting. But the Advocates for Youth, when we're talking about sexuality for 5-year-olds or lower, that actually, I think it was 0, wasn't it?
0 to 3 years old.
0 to 3 with their sexual tendencies, and 5-year-olds. And it was just, and these are supposed to be the parental guidelines that mimic what you would get at your doctor's, at your kid's physical for their yearly physical. You would usually get an information growth and development sheet. And they mimic that. But the focus of them, and what on earth is going to be the classroom part of it? If this is what's going home for the parents, what is it going to look for the classroom? And there were a couple comments in the minutes about how they, especially with the high school part of it, that they didn't like some of the way that the students' instruction, the student-facing ones were portrayed. Well, we didn't see any except maybe the teen violence, and I really didn't like some of what they said about the teen violence.
No, I agree.
Because they didn't fully go into that's an unhealthy relationship, not that just that you shouldn't have sex if you have this kind of unhealthy relationship, but you really should be giving hints, especially for young women, how to get out of or men, how to get out of these relationships or not be in these relationships, because there's a lot of dating violence, and there are a lot of girls especially that are very emotionally vulnerable, damaged, physically vulnerable in these situations.
Well, and I think that's a good place where you can start talking about those other sections of these students where it's not just going to be a heterosexual relationship. There's going to be relationships of all different shapes and sizes, and talking about how men and women, no matter how they identify, can keep themselves safe. That is a topic that goes across the board.
Right.
And there are ways to do this and make sure that they understand self-worth. A lot of this starts with teaching them how to respect each other no matter what. Right. It doesn't matter, and that's how you start when they're little. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just so concerning, and it is difficult for people like Ashley and April and I to be looking through this and seeing it myself as a parent. I know you, April, are probably looking at it as a parent and somebody who's been on the board. And Ashley looking at this going, just can't even believe this is even happening. It is just very, very upsetting, and it's concerning.
It really is. And honestly, it's a lot of information, and I know it's a lot for parents to look into and understand. And the board honestly is trying to make it sound like it's not that big of a deal. And not really understanding where parents are coming from, because you're developing something that your kids are learning in the classrooms, and they're coming home with even more questions because they don't have this stuff on their minds. Right. I mean, I really don't think that a 5-year-old is thinking about gender identity or who they're going to be. I mean, I really don't see that. So, with the Board of Education kind of just saying, oh, well, give it time. We're going to develop the curriculum. We're going to allow opt-outs. We're going to allow this and that.
I want to see it. Make the policy.
Right.
Make the change.
I don't see it actually happening. No. It's great that you're talking about it. Okay, go ahead and talk about the opt-out. Right. But I want to see it in action. Right. And that's what we're concerned about.
Right. And I think an opt-out is all well and good, and it might make some parents feel better, but there are others like myself that feel that even an opt-out What if I miss that find out first? What if I miss that paper letter that's supposed to come home 10 days before you give instruction? What if my daughter leaves the classroom? I have a 5-year-old that does not think about any of these things. She's a princess one day, she's a frog the next. It doesn't really matter, you know? But what if my child does leave the classroom and then goes back in and she's got very confused friends that are talking about everything that's going on in the classroom, which they're going to do. That's what kids do. They talk to each other. They talk to each other, and they talk to each other about everything. Why weren't you in class? Oh, your parents won't let you learn this stuff? You know, it's just more divisive
and I think
areas.
I think certain conversations, should be brought to the parent.
Oh, that's many conversations.
And
absolutely.
That's where I stand in this. It's like all these conversations that would probably be brought up when you're teaching this information should be brought back to the parents. And I feel like, you know, there are great teachers. I am not going to talk bad about teachers.
Not at all.
Teachers are stuck in a really hard spot.
Absolutely.
And my heart goes out to them and breaks for them, to be honest, because they, they're stuck with getting things on their desk and they're not having a choice in the matter.
Right. And some of the stuff, especially when it comes to 443 and things like that, where they can get in trouble for talking about things with the parents or talking about a lot of the gender identity issues that come up in the classroom.
Well, I'm sure
kids, they get.
I'm sure you can imagine that that's a really good point, because as an educator, you see policy 443 come through. You might think, okay, this is going to really help our transgender youth. It's going to help our LGBTQIA plus community. It's going to be there to protect them. And then, whoa, but I can't say anything if these children confide in me. Okay, maybe I can do that, but now, whoa, I have to teach every other kid about all the different genders and sexual orientation. So I may have more kids coming to me now that have felt this way, and now they know that I can talk to them, and I can't tell more parents. This is putting a lot of strain on educators that they don't need to have.
You have to think about it. Like, if you had, this is just, for instance, for me, like if I was a teacher and a student came up to me and they were questioning things and they weren't really sure and they didn't know how they fit in their own body, okay? And they told you, I don't want to be in this body anymore, and I am, I don't trust my family, I don't feel that I can talk to them. And you feel that, and that student might be at that place where they don't know if they want to live anymore. I'm sorry, this breaks my heart.
No, it's very true. And it's happened. We've seen this happen.
That sort of thing happening. How do you, in that policy 443, does that stop a teacher from going to the kid's family and saying, like, this kid could be suicidal because of what they're feeling, and they can't do that because of this policy?
I have not read that in policy 443.
Well, but they can't discuss it. So you do have a situation where if a student is choosing to be a different gender at school, and you are seeing this, you are seeing schools across the country help with transition plans. There are schools that are being sued for that right now.
Right.
You are seeing schools.
Not here yet.
Yeah. Well, we don't know. Do we know that? I don't know that. Hopefully not. Because you have the setup for it.
Well, I think I'm trying to be optimistic, because I think I think we seem to be a little bit behind what we're seeing in other states.
Yeah, as far as that goes, maybe. But my whole thing, when I heard about, when we were talking about 443 and we were talking about not letting teachers have to call a student a different name in class versus an email they send home to parents, and how difficult that would be for a teacher. And we had those discussions, and we had discussions about parental involvement. And I looked at the guidance counselors that were sitting across from me, and I'm like, you were talking about the highest risk group of kids.
Yep.
And you're not even going to tell the parent. And if something happens to that child, in my opinion, you were culpable in that. Because you didn't even tell them. And
you can have conversations with the parents if you are concerned about
the child's safety.
You should be calling hotline. You should be calling for counseling. You should be calling the parents.
Right.
Absolutely.
But if you can't tell them the whole story,
or how they got there,
or why they're at this point,
getting that child care at that point. The worry for me is if a school or a specific educator knew about the struggles that this child was having for a while, and then it led to this position where this child felt like they didn't want to live anymore. that teacher's going to have a lot of guilt.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine that.
Mm-mm.
For the teacher to be in that situation, that's where I'm concerned with 443.
And
I mean, there's more concerns with 443, but that's like a really big concern.
Right. And safety and what we've seen in Loudoun County and things like that.
Yes.
And where the policy is getting taken. Yes. What
That's
we're
why I have
seeing
a lot
with
of
the
concerns.
rollback of the Title IX protections, which are going on right now. And I have kids that played sports, and I can't imagine, like, I just went to a men's, the lacrosse, the CMC championship today, and those boys are beat up. There's massive concussion, things like that. I cannot imagine if one of those 6'2", 17, 18-year-olds, because some of them are definitely 18 now.
Yeah.
Were playing against, and you could have, if they were playing as a transgender female on the girls' game that was happening earlier that day.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine the difference in anatomy, the physiology part of it, how their bodies react, how much that a young woman could get hurt in that situation and not be at a fair competitive advantage. And so it's just, the whole thing is very interesting, and we're going a little off topic,
Yes.
but,
Right.
but they are all related because we're seeing these in our schools. With rollbacks of Title IX, we're going to see that on our playing fields, across the schools. And so we're going to have to be able to deal with that.
But a lot of this, I think, is brought into, it comes all back into all of this education. So with that, is there any last...
I think that one of the main concerns that you had said that you've seen, and I've seen it too, over and over again, please show me how are they teaching this? Do we know what the curriculum is going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. Parents pleading that they want proof on both sides. Where can you prove that this is going to be sexually explicit, that you're so against this? It's just teaching kids about different families. That's not it. That's not what this is about. Yes, they are going to teach kids about different families, and I think that's wonderful. I don't have a problem with that. I truly don't, because the reality of society today,
it's much different.
Families are different, we don't judge anyone.
And everyone should be respected.
Everyone should be respected, and that includes the kids that have heterosexual parents.
Yeah, but they didn't include that one in the list.
They did not exclude that.
Which it is in the national sex standards when you talk about the difference in family. Nuclear was right in there, but in ours, they're not so much.
So what I would advise is that if parents really want to see what could potentially be some of the curriculum that is going to be implemented, or things that look like it, the framework, word for word, follows the 3 R's that are used with Advocates for Youth. You can look at some of the proposed lesson plans that are there, that are grade by grade, and get a kind of understanding of how it could be, and I'm going to reiterate that, could be implemented with our curriculum. Because we saw several documents in the FLAC meeting that were from those lessons for parents, and it came directly from the website. So
you were thinking, our natural thing, which we are going to find out. We are going to find out if they're using any Advocate for Youth lesson plans already in our middle schools. First of all, that's one of the things we need to find out.
Yeah.
We are not done with this topic. We are not done searching for the truth.
We are not.
Because we want parents to be awake, and we want them to be empowered with knowledge. And whether they agree with whether FCPS and Dr. Cuppett and whoever's talking, Mr. Brian Griffin or whoever it is, whether they agree with our analysis of Comar and whether they agree with our analysis of the opt-out is irrelevant, because if they don't agree, put in a policy that will protect our parents, help pass legislation that will protect our children, stand up for our kids, stand up against MSDE, say that you don't believe this is right to be taught at certain levels, and that FCPS is not going to do with that. Stand up and say it and fight for our kids and help us fight for our kids.
And that's what April and myself and Heather Fletcher and Tiffany Noble are really trying to get so involved in this, because you know what? Honestly, we can't wait to December of when we get on that board. By that time, I'm sorry, but this is why we've been struggling this whole time, because we want this to be out there now. We want changes now. We have shown up to MSDE meetings We have been as involved as we possibly can with the community at Board of Education meetings
and community and committee meetings and
everything. This is what we have stood up for and what we're going to continue doing.
Right.
I mean, whether or not, whatever happens, but we can't stop and just say, well, you know what, we're running for this position.
No,
this isn't what this is about.
We're not going to stop because we're giving parents the information that they need to read and ask questions.
Yes, and do their own research.
That's why, and so in this video, or whatever this is going to be,
we'll figure it out later, right?
We're going to provide all of the documents that we have been looking at. We've provided some of them, and we're trying to find the best form to give it to you, and so that you can find it on your own. Again, all of these documents were found on MSTE website, Advocate for Youth website, or
FCPS.
Or Board Docs, FCPS. Yes. That's where almost all of these documents are found from those sites and from going and reviewing through meetings. And I just want to tell you where it comes in from a legislative standpoint. The legislature, the House of Representatives, had a chance twice in this last session to protect our youngest learners. There was an amendment that was put on their discrimination in classroom instruction amendment to House Bill 850. And this said, a public school may not provide classroom instruction by school personnel or a third party on sexual orientation or gender identity. Now wait, don't get crazy.
Yeah.
To students in pre-kindergarten through third grade. Our youngest learners, our 3, 4, 5,
up
6,
to 9.
7-year-olds, in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate, or in a manner that the department determines is inappropriate. That's all it was. That's all the amendment said. And by party lines, Democrats in Maryland would not pass that one little protection. One piece, not one amendment on it. They wouldn't listen to what Republicans had to say. And I'm tired of what's going on in Annapolis. And that's what I want to fight to change, because we need people that are going to stand up, people that are going to do their research, that are passionate about education in the state, because it is heading in a complete wrong direction.
Right. And I want to keep going back to this MOU, this contract between Advocates for Youth and FCPS, because it literally says that they would bring people in to train the teachers to teach the stuff.
This is all related.
This is all related. And, how do we know this Advocates for Youth contract ended, right? In 2021.
Maybe. We'll have to see if they extended it. We have to look. We keep looking. Yes. This is the thing. We keep looking for everything. So if they did extend this, are they doing this with just Advocates for Youth, or are they doing this with Planned Parenthood? Because we have Planned Parenthood that went to MSDE when this curriculum was being voted on, saying that they would bring people in to train. They did offer to train.
Yep.
Is that going on, or is that going on into other school systems? And Comar says they have to have the training, which some of them may, some of them may not. We don't know, but
it makes sense that they would shoot this amendment down then, because they're not supposed to be partnering with third parties.
Yeah.
Right. But that's the thing. It's you have to keep this. All we do is keep looking and keep looking, and we've been finding as much as we can, and that's why we're bringing this to you differently than what we have been, because this is information that can't be in one post.
No,
it's so much information, and there's still more to even talk about.
Yeah, we didn't even scratch the surface.
And we are going to be, if this
On Thursday, the 12th, we are having the movie Whose Children Are They showing at 6 p.m. at the Elks Lodge, right off of 40. And that goes over all of this information and goes over what's going on in the schools and what has been happening with Board of Education meetings and everything else all across the country. So it gives you a little bit a lot of rundown
A lot.
of what
a lot. It's a 2-hour movie.
It is, and it's a lot of rundown of what's going on. And I think
we're
a lot
not
of people
doing this. We're not doing this as a political fundraiser. We are actually bringing it as a service to the community.
Yes.
So that they can have this information again in a different way. We will be there. If anyone has questions, we will do a brief overview. And then we will stay for questions until we get kicked out of the room. But we will stay for questions. And then you guys are having another event that is
a campaign event,
which is June 11th.
Yes.
Yeah, June 11th
Saturday.
at Dubs Park in Myersville. That is just going to be a great day of fun. We're going to get together with, and it's family friendly. There, we will all 4 candidates will be there. We are all running independently. However, we would love to sit in those chairs together because we're already working together, and we all have I talk to these girls more than I talk to my own husband. I mean, seriously, like, we do.
Oh, trust me, I know.
Yeah.
My husband is very tired of when I was on the board of Brad Young and Jimmy Reader calls.
But I have to say, I do have to mention that the movie is not appropriate for children.
No.
I know people have brought up about the ticketing. We don't have control over the ticketing. It's a third party.
Right.
So just understand that it is not appropriate for kids, even though this is talking about information that's being taught in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's not appropriate.
But it's not appropriate for children to see.
Ironic, isn't it? Just like in some of the board meetings where they're shutting down the parents from talking because they're reading what's being taught in the school.
Yep.
It's really interesting.
So, thank you, I guess, for listening to us.
Yeah.
But I think this is a great start, and maybe we continue doing it this way, so then people can kind of hear us talking about it, and we have 4 lovely ladies running for Board of Education that hopefully can make a really good change, because that's my plan.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you.
That's my plan.
I'm with you.
And then we got, like I said, and then to have the changes at the state is huge. To have people that know about education and know what they're actually passing.
Yeah.
And to try to rein some control over that state. Right now, that State Board of Ed and MSDE.
So, I just put it out there. I want you to do the research of who you're voting for.
Yeah.
And who you want to be voicing your opinion, because that is your vote. That's your vote. That's your right. But after all of this, we will probably talk more.
Yeah, there's going to be much more talking to go. We appreciate you all listening, and, do hope that you will do your own research. Remember, we are not on the board. We are parents and citizens just like you, and if we were able to find it, you can too. Now, you can do this, and any questions that you may have, reach out to any of us, or the other 2 ladies that are running, Heather Fletcher and Tiffany Noble, Ashley Nieves, and myself, April Montgomery, or April Miller, who's running for delegate in District 4. We are eyeballs deep in this stuff, and we will answer your questions. I hope that we were clear this time with where we truly do stand, and that is for the honest safety of all of our children, not just the small groups here and there, but all of them, all the families, all the children. They all deserve to be respected, all of them.
And to empower parents to be part of their education, because there's a nationwide movement right now to take parents out of the educational process, and it's worse now than I have ever seen it.
Yes.
For the NSBA, the National School Board Association, to call parents terrorists that want to have a say in their kids, for people very high up politically to say that parents don't have a right or should not have a say in education just because they go to a public school. Schools are a reflection of the community. Schools are built around the community. You can't separate them. I don't even want to see a world where we would have that happen. And to try to separate kids from their families and from family involvement is absolutely, I think it tears apart society. It fractures society when you do that. So that's my opinion about that, but that's why we are trying to empower parents to stay involved. It is your right as a parent to be involved in your child's education, period.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will talk soon.